Welcome back to another amazing, smashing episode of Krusty Car News, and we have 5 absolutely banana messages for you today. The first story is Nissan. Oh no, it just keeps getting worse. Now it's tens of thousands of layoffs and they're shutting the doors. The second story, would you believe it? We can't even get a break on used vehicles. The prices are going up there too. The third story, yes, in fact, there's a whole new scam in the car buying industry. Go figure. This one, I'm going to save you some money. The fourth story, we're going to answer that age-old question. Why are used vehicles so expensive again? And the fifth story, we're going to share the biggest depreciating losers of 2025. So if you've been looking to get a great deal on a slightly used car, this is your list. So sit back, grab your snack, grab your favorite drink, hold on tight. It's going to be a bumpy ride. Let's get into it now.
Life's too short to drive boring cars.
The first story is Nissan literally going out of business. Sure, while they have vehicles on the car lots that are selling, it's just not enough. Last year, $6.5 billion loss. They're shutting factories and they're firing workers. This can't get much worse. 99% of their profits out the window in the first part of 2024. CEOs have changed, CFOs have changed. Sales are in the tank, and with about $6.5 billion loss this year, Nissan has no choice but to shut their doors, close some factories, and mass layoffs are ensuing. It seems every week there's new updates for Nissan. Sadly, we've talked about this time and time again, but things keep just getting worse. Sales are in the tank, and while a lot of the vehicles that are selling, like the Rogue for example, they're doing so under the pretense of heavy incentives. That's the only way a lot of these vehicles are selling. And that's where their profits have gone, to incentives, to marketing. And ultimately, the profits simply aren't there. They had a chance late last year to team up with Honda, but that fell through as well, and those hopes are dashed. And now it's to the point where even aggressive sales tactics and marketing schemes, as well as the heavy incentives, isn't enough to dig them out of the hole. Nissan's been struggling for the last several years with a lot of their product line. A lot of their vehicles just are slightly lackluster. They have a lot of strong competition both in the North American, US, Canadian markets, as well as Europe. But it's the Chinese market that's really held them in a tough spot. Jatco, that's right, the supplier of their automatic transmissions in some of their vehicles, a series of belts and pulleys have created a lot of problems, a lot of rough reputations, and now finally, the new redesigned Nissan Murano, like we're looking at right here, finally has a change. They've gone back to what is more conventional torque converter automatic transmission. I will admit openly that these vehicles definitely have a nicer look, more modern. I think they were overdue. They have the nice badging or the light bar across the back. Here we have a platinum, good looking vehicle. They were overdue, and that's the problem. But is it too little, too late? Because vehicles like the Nissan Rogue are now one of the vehicles that's barely holding them on by a thread. These are selling like hotcakes. And are they selling like hotcakes because of the quality? Not entirely, because they also feature the CVT transmission, but they're selling because of massive incentives. And they have the variable compression engine, which is a 3-cylinder drivetrain. Not necessarily the best either, but they are selling because of the price tag. And here we have one for $38,000. And being we're talking about the 60th anniversary event, do you think they can make 61 years at this pace? The latest news this week has Nissan making some drastic changes. They're actually shutting down 7 more facilities that are manufacturing these Nissan vehicles. And on top of it, there's mass layoffs. As a matter of fact, on top of the 9,000 layoffs that they introduced to the organization last year, they're adding another 11,000 layoffs this year. That's a total of 20,000 they are laying off within 6 months time frame. A clear indication things are not well in Nissan territory. And while unfortunately Honda and Nissan couldn't put together a collaboration, that essentially leaves Nissan standing all by their lonesome. Part of the problem is Nissan hasn't had serious competition in the electric, or specifically even more so the hybrid space. They don't really have a hybrid vehicle, and even with the Area or the Leaf, it hasn't been competitive enough when they're looking at the Chinese market, and their sales in China have been going off a cliff. A lot of customers are saying there's a couple ways to look at this. Number one, of course, there could be huge incentives, meaning you could get great buys, some great deals and great discounts on a lot of vehicles that are late model, look great, and have all the shiny new tech. But other people are looking at it the other way. The second point, of course, is that there's a risk you buy a vehicle and then a year or 2 years later the organization shuts down. What do you think? I'd like to hear your comments down below. Whether you think the company is in that dire strait. The way it stands right now, it looks like of those 11,000 workers that are getting their walk-in papers, it looks like about 2/3 of them are from the manufacturing division. Of course, manufacturing being plants, facilities that are building these vehicles. If you don't have plants, you don't need workers. It's quite simple. So a lot of these vehicles, they've got inventory for days now, more inventory than they know what to do with, and sales aren't there. Why do you think you're closing plants? You don't need to manufacture what you're not selling. These are vehicles, even though they're selling at a mass amount and a mass abundance, it's quite clear that they're not selling enough. And closing 7 plants out of alleged 17 is a clear indication things are not doing well. So during this cost of living crisis, it's really starting to impact everybody. It's starting to impact the buyers. It's starting to impact some of these organizations as they become less and less competitive with the competition. A lot of those are in China. Even some of these vehicles are looking to be relocated to US soil just to try to avoid some tariffs. So the other third of the people getting laid off are going to be a combination of sales, administrative functions, and virtually any other role could be on the potential firing line. But unfortunately, Nissan has continued to struggle month over month, and of course now year over year. A lot of it's quality controls, a lot of it's just not selling, and of course a lot of big incentives on products that people aren't really interested in. So you do think Nissan's approach to bring people back into the doors with these new rejuvenated models, do you think this is enough to get these vehicles sold? Do you think this is enough to get a lot of people back in the door buying Nissan products again? Even the discussion about bringing in one of their old popular SUVs is possibly coming back. And they're even considering, again, bringing in something, rejuvenating some older models that were popular back in the day. Unfortunately, cars like the Z car, they are selling quite well. Unfortunately, between the Z car and the Rogue, they are selling well, but what about the rest of the brand? Why are they not selling either? If you've been considering buying a Nissan, what do you think? I'd like to hear your thoughts, whether it's a risky time or maybe it's an opportunity to get a smashing deal. The second story, I'm going to share an experience that I had lately shopping for used cars. These dealers really have more tricks up their sleeves than you can imagine. The prices of a lot of these new vehicles have gone up, skyrocketed in the last 5 years, and many buyers are struggling with finding value in buying a new vehicle, and so they start to look over at the used car market. And then pickup trucks came along, and we saw the prices just go up, 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 year over year over year, to the point where we've seen 30, 40, 50% increases on the pickup trucks. Now this is one of the top trim levels of the Ram. This is a 1500 SST-HO, beautiful wheels on here. This is clearly one of their most blinged out high trim level vehicles you can find in the half-ton space for Ram. Lower level, upper level. Here we have a Ram. This is a tungsten right here. Absolutely beautiful truck. Two-tone here, beautiful handles, gorgeous interior with the nice big screen in the middle. I love this look. I love this truck. Look, you get the split toolbox here, Ram box, you get a slider. Naturally, this is the top trim level. And again, tungsten, more detailing, big Ram in chrome. It's a 4x4. Why wouldn't it be? This is going to have every feature you can possibly get. And the tungsten was advertised as going up in price simply because they threw everything at it for features. And while some people love the top trim levels, how did we possibly get here? I mean, let's take a look at this. This is a Ram 1500 Tungsten Crew 4x4, and this one here is $108,000. A lot of these vehicles now only sell with heavy incentives. Just ask Jeep how that's working out. How about Dodge? How about Ram? Those vehicles are only selling when the manufacturer, Stellantis, or any of the other brands, it doesn't matter who you are. You could even be, even a lot of the luxury brands, like Tata Motors. We talk about Jaguar, Alfa Romeo, even the likes of BMW, Mercedes, stock prices are nosediving. They're all struggling, and they're having to push heavy incentives to get people to buy these vehicles. So if people can't afford new vehicles, people can't afford the prices of these new vehicles during a cost of living crisis, and you need a vehicle, what are you going to do? I mean, I've seen people all over begging for money on almost every single corner. Now, nobody likes to do that. Everybody's pride's intact. Everybody just wants to have a good job, put in a good day's work, earn a good day's keep, and of course, just go out there and afford the little things in life. And sometimes a vehicle is what you need to get to work. But even that's becoming cost prohibitive and out of touch with a lot of buyers these days. And $73,000 SUVs aren't what most people can afford. I've known people personally that were driving full-size SUVs, trucks, all kinds of big expensive vehicles, only to find that once that vehicle wears out, it's miled out, they've had to go car shopping and they've made some of their buying changes. Yes, they're making different choices. And this is what I've seen some people transition to. They're going from a full-size SUV down to something like this. Believe it or not, people are looking for something that they can actually afford. And a lot of times it's new, but sometimes it's even used. A lot of times, you know what, you find an older used car like this, maybe 3 or 4 years old, maybe it's only got 40,000 miles on it. This is actually, we're seeing a lot more on the road these days. Vehicles like this, vehicles like a base model Cruise, or even a smaller little Toyota. These are the kind of vehicles that you're seeing people drive in. Not so much of these on the road anymore. These haven't been selling. I've been watching these for a while, and most of these vehicles have been parked here for the same time for a significant period of time, and nobody's buying them. Why is that? Well, because they're significantly priced. We could just take a look at some of these and take a look at the pricing. Let's have a look over here, shall we? I mean, here's a beautiful little Summit Jeep Grand Cherokee. Beautiful. They've got the laser rims or laser cut, big full-size mirrors, good for towing. I love the interior. You've got that gorgeous interior. You've got a little bit of quilted on there. It's leather. It looks like it's heated and cooled. Absolutely beautiful vehicle. Two-tone handles right there. Definitely a nice touch. It's a beautiful vehicle. They're certainly trying to go upscale, and a lot of brands have really shot themselves in the foot. Brands that once were known as the family household mobile. You know, the Jeeps used to be that brand that the boy next door could afford. Even that kid, if you were growing up and you were 19, 20 years old, you could probably go out and afford to buy a slightly used Jeep. Forget it. Now, even Wranglers with their high return or high resale value are holding up, and nobody or very few people, unless you're making 6 figures, are going to be comfortably afford to buy a new Jeep. Because these ones here, this is a 2025 right here. And as we cycle over here, Summit Reserve 4x4. As you can notice, there's lots of options and features, but it's also a price tag of $91,000. I don't get it. I don't get it. It's no wonder people are buying used cars. And then we have Jeep coming out with a new hot model, add more electrification. We know that was the end of Carlos Tavares, was trying to push too much electrics. But this is what we have here, a Wagoneer S. And word has it on the street, looking at statistics, these are not selling at all. Yes, they look more sleek. This is a 4xe Jeep. Of course, they have some nice detailing. And as you cycle around, I'm not gonna lie, it does have a bit of a sleeker look. It doesn't look so big and bulky. Obviously for aerodynamics, they're also adding these wheels, probably for improved aerodynamics. And the headlights look very, very sleek. It almost has a very much, looks like a Dodge Hornet look. So you could see the family resemblance, or almost a squished Grand Cherokee. It's a decent looking vehicle, but clearly they kind of copied the colors off of the Cadillac Lyriq. If you ask me, it looks very similar. But these are not selling. Nobody's buying these. Nobody wants those. And that's why what's going on at Jeep, Ram, Dodge, Chrysler, or even, of course, Stellantis, is they're trying to bring in a new CEO to try to organize the ship and get it steered right, because they're not selling a lot of those vehicles. Nobody's buying that. And even these, very expensive. Very few people are buying these either. And I've seen a lot of these Jeep Grand Cherokees, as well as these Wranglers, sitting on the lot for a long time. I mean, with price tags of $87,000, do you blame people? So a lot of dealers are trying to get their hands on more used inventory. They're trying to buy inventory, pull it from auctions, trades, whatever they can do, because they're not getting enough foot traffic. The foot traffic's not there buying these new vehicles, especially a vehicle like this. This, okay, you might say, look, just go buy something smaller and cheaper then, if you can't afford the big SUVs. Okay, well, what about this? Here we have a little Compass. Look, it has a nice black trim. They put the nice trim on there. Of course, it is a little bit of an upgrade. Of course, they do put a big sunroof on the top. And yes, nice painted handles, nice detailing. I will say this is a good looking little Compass, but this is their little basic pot. How much is this little pot? Well, about $55,000. And I'm not here to talk about numbers. At the end of the day, it's clearly a sign of lack of affordability. You know, 55 grand for a little small Compass. Where has this world come to? I mean, you put all the taxes and extras, now you're over $60,000 for these small little entry-level SUVs. It's no wonder they're not selling, and it's no wonder people are looking for used cars. But unfortunately, the used car supply is running out, and running out fast. And on top of it, what's starting to happen now, if you're shopping for a used car, we were actually out shopping for 2 different cars, 2 different dealerships, and 2 different makes for our daughter this weekend. We were out shopping, went and shopped around, looked at a couple different options. Both of them acted exactly the same way. They have a used vehicle. There were some problems. They had some scuffed rims. They had a body panel that was slightly off, and it probably needed a clip. And there were some odds and sods that we challenged them on. We said, why don't you fix that up? I mean, well, that's got to be part of the deal. You got to clean that up. Well, their first response was, no, you know what? When you make a deal, we can write that in there. We can talk about, how that works in and whether we need to fix it. And then we also found out that we said, well, what about paint protection film? Well, my experience was as soon as you negotiate and you put that deposit down, that's when they start talking and they say, well, you know what? We don't even want to deal with that. You handle that yourself. We'll work that out. If it's $1,000, we'll knock $500 off. You go put in the paint protection film yourself. So they don't even want to fix these junky used cars that they're finding on these lots. And now what you're finding on a lot of cars, if you really start digging, almost every single vehicle that we've come across on the used market has had a bad spotty history. That's right, Carfaxes, car proofs are showing that they've had damage, a $10,000 hit, $5,000 hit, $20,000 hit, and they're being fixed. There's so much of that junk out there. And so you've got to do your homework. You've got to always check your Carfax, always check the car proofs, find out what state it came from. It could have been title washed even. You even have a clean Carfax. That's not even a guarantee. But try to track down where this vehicle came from. Look at the service history. Try to get as much information as you can from these used vehicles, because trust me, I've seen this and I'm living it, shopping for used cars right now, that they're not open and honest. In most cases, they want to get you pulled in, then they'll start rooking you with some of the details. They don't want to negotiate. They don't want to start putting in extras. They don't want to polish up scratched rims. They don't want to put on that paint protection film, even though it didn't come with that. They don't want to do any of that until they're forced to, until you've got money on the table. So if you've been shopping for a used car, don't get hosed. And on top of it, if you love this content, be sure to hit that subscribe button and the notifications bell, just so it lets you know when the next amazing video is out. The third story, would you believe it? There's an entirely new car buying scam. Yeah, it's car buying services. There's a small niche of players out there now looking to extract even more money out of those hardworking hands of yours. Buyer beware. You might think it's a great deal, but somebody's paying the price and you're paying their wages. And having been in the car market for over 35 years, selling cars in auctions, you name it, in repairs, I've seen every trick and scam in the book. Now you have a new one, a cost adder, a cost that it's actually going to cost you, the buyer, getting involved with a lot of these new car buying services. Is it great value? Well, it's actually twofold. You can say in some cases it's great value added, getting some of these car buying services involved, and in other ways it's an absolute another scam. I mean, clearly it's another space in the marketplace where somebody in their infinite wisdom felt compelled to get involved and start a business where somebody didn't want to take care of it. It's no different than putting air in your tires. You can drive down to the car dealership and get the dealership to put in air for you. You just have to pay them a half-hour labor. It's sort of the same idea. It's a very simplistic idea, and yet people still engage some of these car buying services. A lot of them are fast talkers. Some of them look like they're 12 years old and can talk up a storm. But is there a reality? Are some of them as good as they claim to be? Well, what my personal experience is over the years is there's always a benefit to everything. That's how they sell it to you. I mean, do you need some of the protection packages you get with your key fob? Not really. But if you lose this and it costs you $2,000 to replace it, I guess if you lost it and you need to replace it and you have that warranty, it's sort of beneficial, right? So it's one of those things, it's an option. It's almost like insurance. So getting some of these car buying services involved may help you in some cases. Now, I'm not the personal biggest advocate for that type of situation or that service, and I'll tell you why. I'm going to share some of the tips as to how you can avoid even bother getting some of them involved, and why, in fact, it's really, in my personal opinion, one of the bigger scams and cost adders in today's car market. I mean, everything you can possibly imagine is being thrown at the car buyers these days. So it's hard to say no, 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 when in fact you're getting chucked all these different ideas and new extensions, warranty extensions, new add-ons, new concepts, new services that constantly keep you bamboozled and confused as to what you should buy and what you shouldn't buy. Now I want to start out by saying, look, car brand, Maserati, you think of cars, if you're looking for a very specific car, something that's very niche, okay? My personal experience is if you're shopping for a supercar, an exotic car, maybe an old classic, something that's extremely hard to find and it'll take a lot of legwork to come up with. Those are cases and examples of you have people that can absolutely find you some good deals. And maybe not so much good deals, but they can find you the car you're looking for. Maybe you're looking for that rare Ferrari and there's only 500 made. I give you an example like an Enzo, possibly a LaFerrari, and you want to get your hands on something that you know is very difficult. Some of these specialized car brokers or car buying services are great because they'll know where to hunt. They'll have the resources. They'll have the networks. They'll know who's selling those types of cars. They'll go on the search and they'll do some of that negotiation. So there are in some cases, some huge value in getting some of these car services involved. But if you're shopping for every other vehicle, like 99.9% of the vehicles on the road that aren't like this, that most people are driving Hondas, Toyotas, Mazdas, driving Chevys and Fords. I mean, they make these vehicles by the billions. There's so many cars on the road these days. It doesn't take long. In most cities, there's 2 or 3 or 5 dealerships of that same brand. So how do you shop around? It's just a few phone calls. Guess what? There's a lot of tricks that you can avoid some of these car buying services because are they value added? Well, let me just put it out by saying there's car dealerships that respond both positively and negatively to these fast talking services. Some of these fast talking services, they join up and they say they've got 40 years in the car selling business, but most of it was pre-pandemic. Things have changed. Some of the policies, the concepts, and the approach angles are a lot different in approaching some of these dealerships today than it was in 2018 working for an Acura dealership. Things have changed a lot. And so I just want to get to the point. I'm not here to sell a service. I'm here to provide you with the information to help yourself save some money, ultimately get a good vehicle for the best money possible, and give you some insights to what's going on in the market as a whole. We know some of the big losers, some of the big dealers and manufacturers that have been on the brink of going out of business. We know that there's some great opportunities to get some great deals there. So it all starts with your shopping experience. You don't need those services in my own personal experience if you're buying a car like a Toyota, or maybe a Honda, maybe a Ford. Why is that? Well, first of all, do some research. I mean, you're going to do most of that research on the front end anyway. So if you're engaging some of these buying services for you, a lot of them are basically going to say, well, what are you interested in? Well, that's pretty easy homework you're going to do anyway. Chances are you're getting excited and you're going to start thinking, okay, I need a minivan or I need a pickup truck and I need it to do this, and this. Well, you've already narrowed down your buying. Okay, you've already done a lot of that homework. All you're going to do is pass that off to this car buying service. So rather, take that information, narrow it down, do a little bit of basic research. Do you need a pickup truck? It needs to fit within that $50,000 to $70,000 price range. What do you have available? That all starts with reading some basic reports. You want a full-size truck that fits that gambit? Well, you're going to look at probably the big 4. Maybe look at the Toyota Tundras. Maybe you look at the F-150s. You've got the Rams and possibly, of course, Chevy's got their Silverados and all of those types of products. So you're going to narrow it down. You know the vehicles that are in that space. Then you know, do you need 4-wheel drive, 4 doors? You start chiseling that down. Just ask yourself, okay? Because these car buying services are going to ask you, just you ask yourself. Ask yourself these simple questions. What do you really need? What's going to meet your intent? What's going to meet the desires and the function of your use? You have a budget. You have a certain functionality. You have a certain color scheme or scam. What do you have? What do you need? Ask yourself that question. You just need to ask yourself that question, okay? It's straight and simple. That's all it takes, okay? Once you figure out what you have, do a little bit of basic research. A lot of these car buying services aren't necessarily going to get into the ins and outs of issues with problems, reliability, depreciation. Some will, some won't. But ultimately, a lot of that research should be done anyway. That's your own good due diligence to understand the kind of vehicle you're getting involved in. Are you going to buy a 6.2 liter L87 powered Chevy engine? Probably not the best idea in current climate, given the fact that there's over 100,000, no, there's actually almost 900,000 vehicles being recalled right now because of bad engines. So do a little bit of that basic homework. Figure out what you need, your functionality, and of course, most importantly, do a little research on reliability and depreciation. Once you've got that sorted out, you just have to do one simple thing. Look, shop around. It's that simple. That's what these guys are doing. All they're doing is picking up their phone. Here, pick up your phone. We all have one of these days, right? You grab your phone and all you do is go onto the websites, look around, find out, Google, it's pretty quick, Google your area for dealerships. There's probably 4 or 5 of them. If you live in a city of 1 million people or so, look it up. Check it for yourself. Look at all those dealers. But as well, look at Car Gurus, the best site you can possibly imagine. Because pull up Car Gurus, Gurus, Car Gurus, there's one in Canada, there's one in the US. Look it up, search either new or used. If you're looking for a new vehicle, it's as simple as looking for that make and model and year you're looking for. Maybe you're looking for an outgoing 2024 because you know there will be better deals. Look it up. Look online, new vehicles, 2024, Ford F-150 between this price range. You search those up. You might have a list of 25 trucks to choose from. Look them, click into each one. Oh, here's one. I like this one. This one's red. Let's look at it. You go into it, you realize, okay, it kind of meets what I'm looking for. You find that it's been on the lot for, 382 days. Okay, it's been there a long time. Dealers are often getting hungry. They have things like they call floor plan costs. That's their monthly charges that they have to pay to incur because they're having a vehicle. It's like you and your car loans. You have to pay a monthly charge on your car loan. They kind of have to do the same thing because most of these dealers do not own these vehicles outright. So the longer they're sitting with these vehicles, the more money they're paying on interest charges, and they don't like that. So 30 to 60 days is sort of that area, 90 days kind of max. As soon as you start pushing out of that space, then you know they're getting hungry. So in your search on Car Gurus, just realize that, wait a minute, okay, here's a couple trucks. These ones fit my criteria. Then you start calling those dealers. That's what these guys are doing. You call those dealers, maybe you're down to 2 or 3 specific trucks, okay? It fits all the criteria. It's got the price, it's got the color, it's got the specs, and it's been on there for longer than 120 days, maybe 180 days, maybe 365 days. You know you have bargaining power because that's what these guys are going to do. They're going to take what they know is vehicles that have high inventory numbers of vehicles that aren't selling, high volumes, vehicles that are, there's lots of them like it on the lot, and they're going to use that tactic and that negotiation ability against the dealer. So of course they're going to say, one thing you have to ask for, okay? Do these negotiations yourself. Just so, look, what's the out the door price? You don't need to get all willy-nilly about the pricing. You don't need to get all crazy about all the fast talk and the dealer floor plan this and that and hold back costs and, sticker versus invoice versus it. Don't worry about that. Just know for yourself, okay? MSRP is the Monroney sticker. You see that on the window. Know that you're somewhere between 5 to 12%. Below that is invoice pricing, okay? Are they willing to drop below that? Sometimes. But if you can target somewhere between, that 5 to 8% below sticker, then that's probably where it's an extravagantly crazy deal, okay? If you can get sticker price on a Toyota, that seems to be the going price. Try to get below that, but generally speaking, if you can get anything below sticker, somewhere in that 5% below is ideal. You're doing very, very well. If you're getting a vehicle for sticker, well, at least you're not overpaying. Because the worst thing that's going on right now are people have been overpaying market adjustment fees, and then they wonder why they're underwater in 3 years when they go to try to turn it in, and then they have to roll over that negative equity into the next vehicle, and they find they're into this vicious cycle of loss and financial disruption. So forget about all that, okay? Just know that if you get sticker, ideally below sticker, 5 to 10% below sticker is a good spot to be. Some dealers and Toyotas have been kind of weird and sticky with their delivery on time, so they don't have a lot of inventory. So they use that against you for negotiations because they say, look, if you don't have inventory on the lot, sorry, we don't have many. We can't negotiate. We can't budge. That's sort of a game they were playing, but that's not really entirely true. They have some models that are less popular, and we know the Tundras have been struggling as well right now with some of their quality issues and some of their engines. So there are certain vehicles that they will adjust their pricing on a little bit. And I've experienced some of that lately. So you don't know until you know. But the thing you need to ask is not how much for this, not how much for that. You just simply need to ask these dealers, you found these 3 vehicles that fit your criteria, call each one of those dealers because in Car Gurus, it'll tell you how many days it's been there. It'll give you a reference point if it's above, below, is it fair market value, is it below market value? Then you have a pretty good sense of what the average is in your location. So that already gives you a starting point. If it says this is much higher than the average, well then you know either A, these guys probably aren't going to deal, or they're likely overcharging and they're trying to overcharge on everything, or you have just a massive margin that you have to make up. Ideally, I like to start at a place where they're asking fair market value and work off of that. or these dealers that are actually asking below market value for some of their vehicles, that's a good place, because if you can get anything off of that, or even if they don't adjust, at least you know what you have for a price of that vehicle, and it's pretty standard. Okay, the thing you have to say though is, what is the out the door price? What's the out the door price? Okay, all these features, I want to know the out the door price. They're going to give you, well, you know, what do you like? Don't take any extras, okay? That's the first thing. They're going to start to nickel and dime you. They're going to nickel and dime you on a trade. They're going to nickel and dime you on financing and lease costs and rates, okay? Depending on your credit score, they're going to try to gain something somewhere. They're going to try to get you in the door, possibly, and hopefully get you signed up with financing, hopefully make a little money on the back end with some of your trade. They're going to try to get something out of somewhere, okay? But you don't need those services, though. Buying services are just going to ask these same questions. All you need to know is, don't say anything. Go in there. Ideally have your banking already sorted out, okay? Talk to your own banker, your own lending institution, having your finances set up in advance so you know what to expect. So you know that what your finance rates actually should be and could be, okay? So what you need to know is the out-the-door price of that vehicle. No trades, no extras, taxes, registration, all fees, all in. What's the out-the-door price? Because they're going to say, Monroney says, you know, $49,995. Great. Okay, but what's the out-the-door price? Because it's not that. There's admin fees, there's tire levies, there's all these extras, there's GST, PST, state taxes, all these other things that they start slapping in there. These line items that need to go in there. So what you need to do is ask what the out-the-door price is. You can save all that money, save yourself some stress. Don't bother with those individuals because they're there to just take your money. And on top of it, be sure to hit that membership program. You're going to find a lot more about what makes Mark tick and the background scenes behind ECPP. The next story, why are these used vehicles so expensive? What's going on? But I have the reasons, and I can literally help you navigate this crazy market. Why are used cars so expensive these days? Prime example, we have a car here that's 5 years old. This 2020, they're still asking 75% of what it was when it's stickered for brand new. Why is this vehicle holding 75% or 3/4 of its original value that it was when it was new? I mean, traditionally, BMWs and many other cars would lose as much as 50 to 60% after 5 years, but that's clearly not happening. What's going on? One major reason is the new car prices. I mean, a lot of these new cars are absolutely glorious. They're wonderful, but the prices are going up. And it really always boils down to financial factors. I mean, a lot of these cars are great. They have the latest technology. They have amazing drivetrains. But when you start looking at brand new vehicles, you're realizing that there's a lot of financial impact, not just the high prices of new vehicles, the new technology you're paying for, but when you buy a new car, you have all of the extra fees, admin fee, tire levies, and all of the extras that get tacked onto the price of a lot of these new vehicles. That ultimately gets transferred down to you, and on top of a base price of a new vehicle, you could expect to throw another $1,000, $2,000, $3,000. If you're buying an exotic car, you could spend as much as $20,000 just on shipping fees alone. So the popularity of buying used has skyrocketed in the last 5 years, simply because we've seen a lot of manufacturers really crank up the prices on their new vehicles. They haven't gone up by the price and the increase of inflation. Rather, they've gone up almost exponentially in some cases, very popular models. We've even seen market adjustment fees and other fees targeting a lot of very popular models. And a lot of consumers just are not having it. So what that's ultimately doing is driving up the price of anything used. Good quality late model used vehicles that aren't damaged, that aren't wrecked, that maybe have good miles, and maybe aren't exactly the latest and greatest, but shopping for maybe a 4 or 5 year old vehicle is creating a more popular space now. There's an unfortunate part of that, the shortages. And a lot of these used cars are becoming in a high demand because of the shortages, and because people are in fact shopping for those late model used vehicles, they're now harder to find. And because of financial implications, a lot of people are not just choosing to buy used, they're looking at downgrading and buying smaller. You're seeing a lot more cost-effective, lower-cost used vehicles as well. Smaller Escapes, small Subarus. Look, they even have, in some cases, damage on them, and people are willing to overlook that. or rusted wheels. A lot of times consumers are not worried about that as much. They're definitely looking at something that turns the key and runs. Even low-cost vehicles like this are becoming very popular. Domestic vehicles like the Malibu, we know those are going away, and no longer is Chevy producing the Malibu. It was actually canceled this year. But because of that shortcoming, now that creates another gap where an affordable car used to exist. So people are now, instead of buying these really expensive luxury vehicles, they're more electing to go with something lower cost, like a smaller Toyota. So another reason a lot of these used cars are so expensive these days comes down to shortages. I already sort of alluded to that, and the fact that because of the increasing popularity and buyers shopping for used vehicles, there's a natural shortage now. And when you find a shortage, it's all about supply and demand. A lot of times in these marketplaces, when you have supply and demand kicking in other words, shortages naturally drives prices up. That's bare capitalism at its finest. And unfortunately, for people looking to try to get a deal on a late model used vehicle, those deals rarely exist anymore. And you're likely to pay a substantial amount of money, even for a vehicle that yesterday you wouldn't even consider buying back in 2019. Now, in fact, you're having to settle for second best. A lot of these prices are getting expensive comes down to what happened back in 2021. With the semiconductor shortage, a lot of plants were closing down, the shortage of water in some of these countries that were actually producing these chips meant a lot of new vehicles strictly were having to sit in the back 40. They could not produce a lot of these vehicles, and rather a lot of vehicles would wind up on the lot with 90% completion, but they couldn't be completed and sold to the customer simply because they didn't have the chips for some basic modules or some basic equipment, whether it be for safety, whether it be for performance, whether it be functionality altogether. A lot of vehicles simply could not be sold because of this semiconductor shortage. And again, supply and demand kicks into high gear. And because of these shortages, because of the chip shortages, because of the lack of new car inventory, people were spending money and they wanted to get a new vehicle, but they couldn't. So essentially, they started to look at slightly used vehicles instead. And ultimately, again, supply and demand kicks in. And that means you're paying more for that used vehicle because you're competing with the next person who's looking for the same vehicle. Another factor impacting the popularity of used vehicles and the reason why they're becoming in such scarcity has to do with economic factors, inflation, factors that are in many cases are outside of a lot of buyers' control. They often end up having now to shop for vehicles that do look like this, because usually when you're buying something slightly older, you're able to save money on insurance costs, because a lot of times insurance companies don't want to insure you unless you have full coverage on your brand new expensive vehicle. I mean, if you're going out buying your brand new Volkswagen GTI, they're going to want to know that you're fully covered. If you have a huge car loan on that vehicle, you're definitely going to want you protected, because they want to know that in an incident where they have to go at a full loss, they want to make sure that their loan is covered and that that vehicle and the value of it is protected. So insurance costs are typically a lot higher. So often buying an older used vehicle, even if it's 5 or 6 years old, a lot of times people say, you know what, I don't worry about extra rim protection packages. I don't worry about extra slight body damage. Even glass, I won't bother with glass coverage. It doesn't matter, I'll spend the money myself. And a lot of times, even with a few bumps and scrapes, a lot of people don't worry about it. So they go and opt with the lower insurance costs, and so it saves them money on insurance. It also saves them a lot of money on other fees, as I already spoke of. A lot of the extras, paint protection film, floor mats, and all of the extras mean that a lot of customers and a lot of potential buyers just say, you know what, a cheaper used car is strictly going to do me a lot better, and it's going to stretch my money a lot further. And most people only hold on to their vehicles for 3 or 4 years anyway. So used cars don't provide the value that they did many years ago, strictly because of the shortages. They're much more expensive these days. Depreciation isn't what we've seen in the past, where 5 years meant usually 50% off. Usually now you're more like 30 or 20% off for good quality vehicle, a vehicle that has a good reputation for durability. So often people are just spending a lot more on their late model used vehicles. That's just the way things seem to be going these days. And until that supply and demand levels out and changes course again and gets back to something that's a little more normal, what we're going to see is these continued escalation in prices of new and used vehicles. New, of course, because of tariffs, greedflation, and all the other factors that drive manufacturers to increase the prices of their vehicles, but rather also on the used car sector in the space. It also just means, because of the shortages, because of the increasing population, because of the shortage of people buying brand new. Because of the increased prices, there's less and less used vehicles on the market, meaning prices are only going to go up. That said, stay away from any kind of rebuilt titles, stay away from vehicles that have accident history, because that will hurt the depreciation down the line even further. And if you're going to keep your vehicle for a few years and then maybe pitch it again, you want to know that you can get most of your value out. So make sure you do a pre-purchase inspection, even on a late model used vehicle that still has some worth to it. It's always worth doing a pre-purchase inspection, knowing if it's been in flood waters, maybe post-hurricane, maybe a post-hurricane situation, possibly an accident history. You want to have all that information. Pre-purchase inspection is going to make sure that you flush out any mechanical problems or defects, and the mechanics of the choice. If you're looking at this Toyota, make sure you go to a Toyota dealer. They're going to know the specifics about problem areas that may afflict Toyota vehicles. And so make sure that all of the problems and defects are identified, and that when you're negotiating on a vehicle, you get as many of those problems rectified before you drive that car off the lot. So if you've been shopping for used vehicles, then you know that they're getting more and more expensive. It's harder to find a great late model vehicle, but there are some tricks and some navigations. Make sure you stick, of course, with some of the reputable brands, avoid the problem areas. And the fifth story, the biggest value losers in the industry. Yes, in the last 3 years, this is a list of some of the worst depreciating vehicles you can possibly dream of. This is devastating for the new buyers, but it could be an absolute win for you as you pick up that used vehicle after it's 3 years, coming off the lease, coming off their financing. You can now get an absolutely earth-shattering deal on any one of these vehicles. I have a list of the best, hardest depreciating cars if you've been thinking about buying something on the used car market, knowing that you're going to get the best bang for buck. They were very expensive yesterday, and all of a sudden today, they're way off the charts. I mean, we're talking 50, 60% off in a couple of short years. So let's take this from the top. If you're looking for a good deal on the used car market, know these are the heaviest depreciating cars. The first one is a 2022 Ford Mustang Mach-E. It looks like it depreciates on average about 46.13%, and the value is about $24,422. So the average price used is about 28 grand, and new as listed was almost 53. So a huge savings for that car. The next one is Nissan Leaf. Well, we know the Leafs have had some problems, short range, reliability issues, and now they came out with the Area, and there's a whole host of better EVs. If you're looking for an electric vehicle, the Leaf's like one of the pioneers, but probably certainly by no means one of the best. So the average new car price for that was about $32,400. The used car price was about $17,400. So a pretty huge hit. In a couple of short years, you're seeing about an average of 46.29% depreciation, or to the tune of just a shy hair under 15 grand. Okay, how about another one? Clearly, we know that electric vehicles are some of the biggest hit, but if you're looking at buying one anyway, these might actually have you covered. Not all of them are electric vehicles, but we know that EVs are taking a big hammering here recently. 2022 Jaguar I-Pace. New price, we know Jaguar, they're not cheap. $70,000 is list, and the used car price on average is about $36,793. That means you've lost $33,107. If you were the first owner of that car, you took an absolute beating. But as a used car buyer of that, you're picking up a lot of car for a cheap amount of money because it depreciates as much as 47.36%. The next one in line, BMW iX. This was one of the biggest losers. We saw what was going on there. Nobody was buying them new or used. The few that did buy them, it was just more of intrigue. It's almost like driving bad by looking over at a bad car wreck. You don't want to look, but you sort of have to. That's kind of what it's like buying a BMW iX. Brand new, they were about $83,000 and change. Used on average for a 22, that's only 3 years, is down around $43,800. That means you're seeing a loss of about $39,443, or at the tune of about a 47.41% depreciation. So almost 48% is up in smoke in 3 years. If that's not telling you something, I don't know what is. A 22 Audi e-tron GT. Those weren't selling new, they weren't selling used. Nobody wants the e-tron GTs or the e-trons or any other Audi that's electric vehicle. They've had a lot of electrical gremlins. Getting those kick-started, it was a problem. And they were pretty expensive brand new. The GT, $122,400. What a deal. Used car, after 3 years, you're looking at $63,567.50. Unbelievable loss. Yeah, how much? About $58,800. It's almost $59,000 gone in 3 years, and that's about 48%. Ouch. How about another one? Here's one that's not an EV. We know that Maseratis are some of the hardest hit for depreciation. How about the Levante? Yeah, let's try that one on for size. Not cheap. $116,000 and $250. That was new. Used all the way down to $60,000 and change. That's right, the average Maserati Levante lost about $55,999. Ah, screw it. Call it 56 grand is gone up in smoke, and that's about 48.17% lost. Here's another one, another EV. You see a bit of a trend here, perhaps? How about this Mercedes EQS sedan? I test drove an EQE. Definitely want to check it over on 6Speed Reviews. Very popular review channel. My latest and greatest. Definitely want to check it out at the end. I'll link that video. But that came in at $125,950 new as list, plus taxes and extras. And sadly for them, owners of that EQS saw in 3 years drop down to $61,950. That's right. They've lost on average almost $64,000 on that vehicle in 3 years, and to the tune of almost 51% is gone in 3 years. Ouch. How about another one? Another EV, 22 Volkswagen ID4. We know they were incentivized. There was a lot of push to get them out the door. There's huge incentives to buy them through a lease. We know Volkswagen was offering some really aggressive lease rates here this year, actually just a little while ago. They're not selling. They had those door handles that were coming off. Nobody was buying. It was just a chaotic unit. I mean, they're kind of cute, but they're EVs. What can you say? You know the value is going to be in the toilet. Brand new, they were going for about $45,320. And used prices are down around 22 grand. That means you're going to lose about $23,000 in 3 years. Even worse, 51.33%. Up in smoke. How about the next one? Oh yeah, here's a beast. Another ICE. For those ICE lovers, 100%. Not too many ICE versions on the market or on the list of the worst depreciating, but here it is. 22 Chevrolet Trailblazer. That's right. They came in at roughly about $24,000 and change, brand new, and they're down to about $11,000, $12,000 on the used car market all day long. They just don't hold their value. They're kind of poorly made, if we're being honest. Do you want a turbocharged 3-cylinder direct injected engine? Not me. But you know what? You'll lose about $12,000 to $13,000 in 3 years. And even worse, that's about 52% depreciation in those 3 years. Brutal. You know the Volvo brand Polestar? Well, how about this? A 2022 Polestar 2. Brand new, they were about $48,000. Used, $22,800. And sadly, that's about $25,000 lost and equivalent to about 52.5% depreciation. Brutal. Tesla Model 3 is another one, a 2022. Now we know Teslas have been taking a real bad beating. It's been rough. Okay, how about the Model 3? That's their entry-level car. Their little sedan, the smaller one, the more affordable, more popular car that Tesla's been selling. And they came around on average of $54,000. Used car listings, $25,000. A lot of that probably had to do with that flooding of Hertz, and of course a lot of the rentals they were sending off, of course, to the market. But at $25,000, it was a pretty big hit because that was 53.3% depreciation and equivalent to what, 29% or $29,000? Absolutely horrific. How about another one? I'm surprised these guys are even still in business. 2022 Lucid Putrid Air. Big loss. $128,000 brand new, all the way down to about 58 grand. That's huge hit. So you're going to lose in 3 years as much as $70,000 on a Lucid Air. Ouch. I don't know what people are thinking. But that's equivalent to almost 55% is lost. And that's a big chunk of change. Could you imagine blowing 70 grand in 2 years? Ouch. Even Vegas is cheaper than that. All right, let's try the next one. 2022 Tesla Model X, another Tesla. We know they've been taking the beats this year. $130,000 because it gives you the big Falcon doors and the big fancy doors, and people love them, but they don't. They have all kinds of problems and nuts and bolts falling off, the big windshield that costs a fortune when you take a rock on there. Just not a popular car on the used market. Those that want them new, they really want them, and nobody else is buying them on the used car market because they go from about $130,000 all the way down to about $58,000 after 2 short years. Make matters worse, that looks more like about $72,000 lost in 2 years, or about 55.23%. Poof, ouch. You want another big bad one? How about the 22 Tesla Model Y? That's their entry-level SUV. They start around $68,000, they go down to about $30,000. That's about 38% lost, or $38,000 lost, or about 56.6%. Again, up in smoke. Teslas, well, that's a touchy subject right now. And there's another doozy. This is the granddaddy of depreciation right now. Why? Well, because it's expensive brand new. They're pricey as a new vehicle, but a lot of people just don't want to be affiliated with them for various reasons. They're just not selling all that well. It's quite unfortunate, but the Tesla Model S right now, they start at about $120,000, $490,000, and the used car prices are down around $46,000. That means you're going to lose on the average Tesla Model S as much as $74,000 in 2 years or 3 years. Okay, no, 3 years you're going to lose. And that equates to about almost 62% of the value gone in 3 years, 2.5, 3 years. So as you can see, some really big losers. But if you're looking at shopping for any of these vehicles, there's a couple of ICE vehicles in there, there's numerous electric vehicles. But if any of them are on your radar and you've been thinking about buying any of them, just know that you're probably better off buying something, one of those models used. They've been taking such a hit on depreciation. It begs the question, why would you even buy one new? Any of these make any sense for you to buy? I know a lot of them are EVs, but there's a few ICEs in there as well. And on that note, if you're in fact considering some of these cheap vehicles, definitely want to check out that because 2025 has some of the best right there on that list, as well as how to keep your vehicle on the road much longer. Hope to see each and every one of you on the next one, everybody. See you real soon. Bye-bye.